Thank you, Pete. I'm really excited today to be able to talk to you about alternative ranching options. It's something really new that I've been dabbling in, and kind of thanks to a grant that was given to us through the SARE organization, and that's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And they gave us some money to do some trainings for extension agents and NRCS personnel. And we were able to travel to a lot of farms and get a lot of in-depth knowledge from the farmers themselves about different options that are working well for them. And so I wanted to share some of that with you today and also cover some of the marketing side, because often when you get into these alternative or specialty type ranching things, you really have to market them more in a direct way. And so there's a lot of considerations before you jump into one of these practices. So we're going to start out, which is kind of different, with a question. And if you would just type into the chat box at the bottom, what is the first alternative ranching operation that comes to your mind? Oh, so we can type it into the actual box. Never mind. Pete has pulled up a little box there, and if you'll type your answer in, what do you think you're going to hear today? What type of alternative ranching operation is it that you might be interested in? Okay, we're starting to get some good answers in here. I like the first one says niche and niche market. And if I use that term today, know that I mean niche in a very positive light. It was brought to my attention that calling someone's operation a niche could be insulting, but I definitely mean that in a good way. Like they've found a market for a product that is a specialty item. Wildlife management for sure. Grass-fed beef, we'll be covering all these things, raising goats and making cheese, organic meat goats, white-tailed deer breeding, and tourism. So the only thing I see on this list I will not be directly doing is raising goats, but we're going to talk about lambs, so it's sort of the same thing. And I do have experience with someone who is making yogurt off of some raw milk, so that would be similar. We're not going to touch on white-tailed deer breeding. That's sort of a whole different realm that I know nothing about and really am not into. But definitely we're going to cover all these other topics. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we're first going to cover just a number of specialty markets. And so none of these I'll be going into in depth because we'd be here for forever. But I just wanted to give you an idea of the range of specialty markets that are available and that people have successfully undertaken around the state. The first one that comes to a lot of people's minds, and definitely a few of you wrote it in there, is grass-fed beef. Grass-fed beef is a relatively new popular item that you can find at many grocery stores even. A lot of restaurants are starting to advertise that they have grass-fed beef and where they come from. And the thing that's special about specialty markets is that there is a tie from the consumer to the product. And so there's a certain way that people prefer that their animals be raised and what they prefer for them to eat and practices that are done with them. And grass-fed beef is probably one of those products that people think of when they think of maybe a sustainable item that they would like to purchase. One ranch that we were able to tour and have the speakers from there is the Shudde Ranch. And the Shudde Ranch is south of San Antonio. They raise grass-fed longhorns that are mixed with a Dublin bull. Very interesting product. They get a lot of compliments at farmers markets about the taste of their product. It's just something that people are preferring. They are in a more of a drought-ridden area, and so they have to be really careful about preserving enough grass to finish off these beef head. But they do have contracts in addition to farmers markets with larger stores that sell these type of products. So I wanted to cover a few items that I stole from Dr. Rick Machin, a livestock specialist out of the Uvalde office. He was talking about grass-fed. It's a USDA-based program, and it's really a marketing claim that's centered on a production method where the animal's diet is derived from grass. So Basically, they're saying, hey, you have to feed these beef grass and forage for the lifetime of the ruminant. The only exemption they make is the milk prior to weaning that they receive. Grass, forbs, browse, and cereal grains all count, but definitely no grain is allowed. You can feed them hay or haylage or some sort of roughage if you need to. And routine mineral supplementation is allowed. So that's some questions we commonly get about grass-fed animals. The next question that I have for you is, what does the label natural mean? Does it mean that it must be minimally processed, cannot contain artificial ingredients, cannot contain any preservatives, it doesn't mean much at all, or all of the above? All right, so it looks like almost everybody started getting in their vote here. The majority of people said all of the above, and that is correct, although given that A through D is correct, you're all sort of correct in a way. Definitely everything that's labeled there being minimally processed, no artificial ingredients or preservatives. And I think the not much, although 30% of you agreed with me, that's kind of what I feel when I think about the label natural, is that it's not really saying anything too special about meat other than what we typically expect out of the meat products that we purchase in a fresh state especially. So by USDA standards, they have to adhere to 3 specifications. They have to be minimally processed, cannot have any artificial ingredients or preservatives, and they all pertain to post-mortem processing. So in other words, given that it's a natural product, is only talking about what happens after that animal is butchered. And so they're really not taking into consideration how that animal was raised. Although there probably is some level of age and source verification, but there's really not an ingredient list on a package labeled natural, and therefore, in my opinion, it's really doesn't hold a whole lot of weight in the marketing scheme of things. So that's just an example of the difference between something that's grass-fed that does have some sort of standards behind it and a product that's labeled as natural. Okay, question number 3. Is there a difference between grass-fed and pastured animals? So you'll hear something marketed sometimes as grass-fed, and sometimes you hear it marketed as a pastured product. All right, looks like about 25% said don't know, and I was definitely with you before I started in these projects about a year ago. It's really confusing when people use certain terms and what is actually meant behind that term. But 65% of you were correct that yes, there is a difference between pastures and grass-fed. To make it very simple, when an animal is grass-fed, you're saying that they were fed a diet of grass. So just like the grass-fed beef regulations we went through earlier, grass-fed animals should be on some sort of grass, not grain, throughout its life to finish. And then a pastured animal simply means that that animal was allowed to range freely in a pasture and it was fed. So pastured immediately indicates that that animal was fed something, and so a consumer would want to ask more questions about what the animal was supplemented with that was raised within a pasture. All right, so the first practice, in addition to grass-fed beef, that I want to talk about is pastured poultry. And this is something that's really piqued my interest. I have some good friends that ventured into the pastured poultry business. Here on the right-hand side of the screen, you see meat chickens that are moved from these cages. They're out in the pasture, and they move these daily. And so the feces are allowed to go into the ground as fertilizer. So they're really doing double duty while they're out there. No pun intended. And then over on the left-hand side is a picture of pastured turkeys. And so Turkeys can also be done in this way. They are bigger animals, so they'll probably leave a bigger footprint, but still a really great animal that can survive out on the pasture. Some of the bigger challenges you might have with poultry is, of course, disease concerns. Also, you would imagine that you have quite a bit of predators that would like to take off some of your chickens. Some of the ways they've gotten around this is through predator prevention by having trained dogs who are bred really to protect livestock that they keep down at night with the pastured animals. And that seems to have eliminated most of their predation issues by preventing them with the dogs. The ranch that I'm specifically familiar with is Parker Creek Ranch. It's located in D'Hanis, Texas, south of San Antonio. They have eggs. They collect eggs every day off of their chickens. They do a number of different practices on the side just to diversify, such as growing some fruits and vegetables and some herbs. They definitely sell at two of the bigger food farmers markets, the Quarry Market and the Pearl Brewery Market in San Antonio. But they've also been involved in a number of other things that we'll talk about in the marketing section, such as CSAs, consumer supported agriculture, and selling off farm. So they're trying really hard to make a connection between the product and the people. So we're bringing people back to the land and having them have that connection with where their meat actually comes from. Pretty cool stuff going on out there. Another topic I'd like to hit on is beekeeping. It's really interesting that although there's quite a few regulations you would need to look into, a number of years that you have to be practicing before you qualify, beekeeping is one of the practices that was more recently labeled as qualifying as an ag tax valuation, which makes it very appealing for some people. But it's good to know that beekeeping actually takes a little bit of work and knowledge, and it's more than just putting out the beehives on your place and letting them go. There's some maintenance that needs to be done. Especially in this area in Texas, we have Africanized bees, which most definitely will interbreed with your honeybees. And so there's some maintenance behind keeping your bees in a calm, nice state, ones that you would want to work to collect that honey later on. But there is a high demand for raw honey, and these bees are a great way to make a product on the side, no matter what type of ranching operation you're in. And this is not even to mention the fact that we need honeybees to continue the pollination of our plants and our crops. And so they're doing a lot of good for our environment, while you could also be using them as a supplementation of a income through their pollen and honey. This example is from Gretchen Bee Ranch. They're out of Seguin, Texas. Gretchen Bee Ranch was started just maybe, I think, 3 to 5 years ago, probably more like 5 years ago, by Mark Gretchen, and he has hives at several ranches. So he doesn't actually own his own ranch. He uses other people's ranches, and they're happy to have the bees there because they do things such as fertilizing their crops. So it's a really win-win situation. They do sell pollen, of course, the honey off of the bees, and they make some really beautiful ornaments and candles with their beeswax, which burns more cleanly. So a lot of times people that have maybe children that have asthma in the home, they want to use those so they can purify their air. And it won't put any other toxins into the air for their children to breathe. So a number of great things that they're producing for their customers, and they sell at the Pearl Brewery. In fact, Mark is now chairperson or president of the Pearl Brewery, and they sell, of course, off of their ranch. Another practice that is pretty neat is pastured dairy or raw milk. Anyone who's familiar with dairies knows that dairy is a lot of work. So that's a really big time commitment because you're usually milking twice a day, no matter how many cows you have. So it's pretty intensive, and you still have to do all the sanitation after you milk. But raw milk is something that's allowed to be sold in Texas as long as you have your raw milk selling permit, and they sell off farm. Um, One of the places that we were able to visit was the Steubing Dairy, which is in Hondo, Texas. The Steubing Dairy used to be a huge traditional dairy, like many you're probably familiar with. They sold milk for generations, and then it got to be to where the larger dairies were really out competing them because they got a low price for their milk, and they just weren't able to maintain it at that price and keep the number of families that were working the dairy going. And so they ended up selling off their cattle, which is tough. Anyone in agriculture could imagine that's tough go. And they decided to keep maybe 15 head that they had raised to produce raw milk. They sell out constantly. They can't really keep any in stock, and so there's definitely a demand for this product and something a little bit different, and definitely creates a niche market. We also, it's not in this presentation, but one of the things we were able to learn about was a lady who had made a business in San Antonio off of making yogurt out of raw milk. And so she's selling her product at a number of farmers markets at this time. So even think while I'm talking beyond the actual first product, there's many things you could then do with it and sell as a secondary product from these things. Another thing that people get into is grass-fed lamb. That'd be very similar to goat. Grass-fed lamb is, of course, pastured, but they're fed a diet of grass, and so you'll get potentially a different quality of meat off of the lamb. This is something that people have done and sold around Texas for a number of years pretty successfully. We toured one that had lambs in the past, and we're starting to switch over to pastured swine. So we didn't get to see a whole lot of the grass-fed lamb business, but it's definitely a viable one in Texas. As opposed to grass-fed lamb, there's also pastured lamb business. And pastured lambs, of course, are put out on the land, but they're also supplemented with other feed. So they're not relying solely on the grass that's produced on your property, which could be a real benefit, especially during droughty times when you just don't have that much grass. Pastured pork. This was a new one to me. Pastured pork is where you would have pigs out on your place and you would feed them regularly, but they would live in the pasture, and so it's probably really hard to keep track of the number of pigs you have since they're continuously having piglets, and it would make challenges for predators and such, but there is a demand for a pastured pork product and allowing pigs to range freely. People like the idea of their meat being able to be treated in this way. They're also often fed a diet that includes like non-GMO type diet, trying to give something special for this product. Also, a big draw is to have heritage products. So any of these different species that we've talked about could have a heritage breed that's just one of the original breeds, like the wattled pigs. And so that's a really draw for people too, because they feel like that's kind of going back to our roots and a product that was simple and good. Another thing that you could do, of course, is combine another number of these products that we've talked about on one place, especially when diets don't overlap directly. It could be beneficial to have multi-species grazing, and it would definitely lower your risk, just like bringing in a smaller niche market into an already operating ranch could lower your risk if something doesn't work out one year. So multi-species grazing is something else I want you to keep in mind while we're talking about these different products and how you could market them. Finally, I'm of course a range specialist, so I know very little about organic vegetables, but there is a market in Texas. In fact, there's so few people who are actually certified as organic in Texas that most of the organic food that you see at HEB comes from out of state, which was surprising to me because they often have their commercials where they're talking about local producers producing most of their product, but when you go to that organic section, um, it's just the lack of organic vegetables in Texas and the reason that they have to journey further to find that product. The reason that none of the ranches that we visited actually had organic products, although they could say that they abide by as much of the organic guidelines as they could. But one of the big key things is that you can't use herbicides. So if they have a brush issue, they wouldn't be able to use herbicides to treat their brush. And for those reasons, they just didn't feel like it was beneficial to their property to be 100% organic. So in Texas, the organic certification is overseen by TDA's organic certification program. So there's a website there, www.texasagriculture.gov, and I'll type that into this chat box here. So you can click on that and save it if you want to look through their guidelines later on, but they outline exactly what you need to do. And there is a fee attached to being organically certified, of course, because they're going to have to come out and inspect your place. So there is a fee, and you will have to charge a little bit more for your product in order to make up for that fee. And that's why oftentimes when you see something like organic products advertised, they do have quite a premium price attached to them. And oftentimes that's because there's more money going into them. Even when we talk about if someone's feeding a non-GMO food to appeal to a certain audience or a certain consumer base, that GMO food may cost 3 to 4 times what regular everyday food would cost, and so they're putting more into those animals, and so they would need a premium price in order to cover all of their fees. So be sure you keep in mind what's going into it, and the fact that as a result, you're going to have to find consumers who are willing to pay that price over and beyond what you would normally see at maybe a grocery store. Something I definitely don't want to leave out is ecotourism. So people who have properties, especially if they're located where they're near a major highway or major city, or they're not too far out, they could draw a pretty good crowd. Just like around the state, you've seen a lot of corn mazes pop up. One of the original ones that I've seen is the South Texas maze in Hondo. It's right off of Highway 90 that comes straight out of San Antonio, and they draw thousands and thousands of people on a Saturday to experience their maze and their hay rides and their potato guns and different fun activities that they have for the kiddos out there. So it is possible to do ecotourism. You do have to be a people person, of course, and there's a lot of things into that as far as figuring out how to be good leaders, because you're going to need a lot of workers underneath of you. And so that's one of the take-home messages that I learned from visiting them, is that definitely you have to work on your management skills if you're going to grow and have many different facets to your ecotourism. But having something like corn mazes is something that would utilize your property during certain times of the year and allow you to get a little bit of extra income. So when you think about ecotourism, there's also many resources that are available. And if you go to our website, which is just the Extension Bookstore website, and I'll see if maybe Pete would put that in for us there. When you go to the Extension Bookstore, you can type in ecotourism or those type of enterprise opportunities, and a number of publications will come up. So I would encourage you not to reinvent the wheel. They've really thought through some of these things and different key points that you need to focus on to make sure that a product or an activity is going to work on your property. So one I can think of off the top of my head is they have some really good ones on nature photography. So just bringing people onto your beautiful place and allowing people who don't have access to land to have access. It really means a lot to them, and people are willing to pay for that. They talk about how to set up nature photography stands even, so they walk you through different ways to utilize your property and the best management practices for allowing people to enjoy that product and you to make a little bit of extra product from it. Thanks for putting that up there, Pete. So there's agrilifebookstore.org. So, of course, when we think about ecotourism, I know what comes to my mind is wildlife, because wildlife are so awesome to enjoy. And if you can think about not having access to that, I'm sure you could see why people would be willing to pay, especially to let their kids have access to those things that maybe they had when they were children. But also wildlife can be for wildlife hunting leases, and there's a number of game species across our state that are highly desirable. And it would be fairly simple to set up a wildlife lease, and given that you could really pick out what you want to include in that certain lease. One of the better publications that I've seen is the Texas Deer Lease by Juden Fambro. He works with our real estate center at Texas A&M University. And he outlines how, you set the animals and the time and consider if they're going to come just for a weekend or a day lease. There's an actual liability sheet in there that walks you through how to set up liability sheets and waivers so that you can protect yourself and your property in the event that something does happen while people are in your place. So that would really help out for any ecotourism type of business that you want. We also, if you go to the bookstore, there's another one on wildlife leasing, just like there's one on grazing leases. So how to set those up. So really check out that information and be sure that you've thought through all the different things that they've thought to put in these publications before you get started. So why would you even want to combine wildlife if, say, you have a traditional cattle ranch? So I wanted to give you an example that comes from King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management's very first symposium, where Dr. Janot did a model where he looked at how much this mock ranch, because a model is just like a setup ranch, but they try to make it as realistic as possible. They took out the land expense. So if you're paying on your property, that wasn't included in these numbers just to make it equate to what somebody could maybe relate to. And it's in hectares, so you have to kind of think it's in hectares instead of acres. But here's the comparison of different enterprises, such as a cow-calf conventional alone compared to a stocker steer operation compared to wildlife. And you can see that they all pull a decent amount of money per hectare. Cow-calf operations and wildlife can be very similar, which depending on the year. Cattle prices are high right now, but sometimes I bet wildlife leases would carry a ranch in lower years. So those could be pretty similar. Stocker steers we would expect to be a little bit lower money profiting per income per hectare because stocker steers are typically only brought on during those years when you have above average conditions and you have extra forage to utilize. So those are going to be on and off, and so you may not make as much as having your own cow-calf operation where you have the calves to sell off each year. Okay, but if you combine them, when they look at combining cow-calf with stocker and cow-calf with wildlife, cow and stocker with wildlife, and then all three together, they found that they could really bump up the amount of income that they could make over just cow-calf operations alone. So if we compare it to just having a cow-calf operation, which if you remember was almost $15 per hectare, adding in wildlife in any situation really bumped up that combination greatly. So cow-calf and stocker only bumped it up 3%, but any good rancher knows that having the flexibility of bringing in stockers on years that you don't, if that you have extra forage and not bringing them in when you have to buy hay is really valuable. So that's still 3% is really a good bump in lowering your risk. But if you look at the other three scenarios where we have wildlife included, you could even increase just over a cow-calf 114% of your income by utilizing wildlife leases. Because if you think about a cow-calf operation, you could continue that if you're a careful manager while you're also having people come on as for wildlife lease just because those are independent operations. So definitely something to consider if you'd like to bump up the income on your property. So now I want to switch, we're about halfway through. I want to switch to direct marketing and then hopefully leave time for you to ask questions. When we talk about direct marketing, I mean, instead of taking the cows to a sale barn where you're going to drop them off and they'll be sold, direct marketing, you have a lot more interaction with your consumer. And so you really have to think that through because it's a lot different than what we as ranchers are used to doing with our products. So which of the following do you think are the most difficult outlets for direct marketing? So I gave you a choice between restaurants, stores, farmers markets, community supported agriculture, or mail order catalog. Okay, looks like everybody's answered that's going to answer. Um, looks like the winner here is mail order or catalog, and I would tend to agree with you based on the fact that you really have to be quick about getting those orders out, and some products may not mail real well. You might have to have them frozen and be careful the type of weather that's going on right then. But in addition, y'all thought stores and restaurants and not so much farmers markets or community supported agriculture. So that's really interesting. So let's look at each one and we'll talk about the pros and the cons of each. So first I want you to ask yourself, can you market your own product? Or is there maybe somebody in your family who is more set up to market your own product? It really takes somebody with the right personality to do that. Um, I'm not even sure if I would be really good at marketing because you really have to deal with people. You're going to be proud of your product, and you really have to be okay with hearing no because sometimes it's just not going to work out. Maybe it would work out later on, but you hear a lot of no's in direct marketing, and you don't want to let that get you down because you really want to get out there and share your story. So just like we all sit and we watch TV show and we're constantly bombarded with different commercials. And those commercials are trying to use a story to sell their product. And if you're like me, sometimes lately these commercials, even some of the better ones, you watch a whole commercial and you may even like it, but you can't remember what product it was actually selling because they had such a story to go with it and it may not even be related to the product. Well, as opposed to that in direct marketing, your story is selling your product. So you're really using the heritage of your ranch, of your family, what type of product you're hoping to provide for them, explaining why you feel like that's the best type of product that you could produce on your place. Um, a lot of times people ask me, why would I pay more for a product? Well, it means something to some people that it's even a local product. Maybe you don't even change the type of practices that you're doing with a traditional agricultural business, but the fact that it's local and that it's sold local and that they know who produced that makes people feel a lot better. Um, Keep in mind you're going to have to sell the whole animal because I'm talking more rangeland here than farming. And you have a whole animal, and oftentimes the products that people desire may be the steaks, but you also have a lot of hamburger off of that cow, and so that's something that you're really going to want to consider how you're going to market it and who is going to purchase those products. So some things you might want to think about is what is your distance to a city if you're thinking about selling in a farmer's market? And we'll look at the fact that later that, there's a lot of farmer's markets starting in smaller towns, but a big one would be your nearest processing facility and their ability to package your product nicely and separate from everything else that they do. The amount of profit that you think you're going to be needing to make off of these products, so how much it costs you to build it and how much you're going to get when you sell it. Very important to consider, and how much of that animal or that product you're going to have to produce in order to meet your bottom line. Also, what resources are available. So if you get very little rainfall, grass-fed beef may not be for you. You're really going to have to be careful about what type of soils, what type of plants you can grow, and if that's a good fit, if that different practice is a good fit. Some people consider what it takes to get into the business. So if you think about grass-fed beef or lambs considered against beekeeping or pastured poultry, which is fairly cheap to get into, that may weigh a heavy decision on what type of niche market you're going to go into right away. How are you going to deliver your product? So once it's done at the processing facility, somebody has to pick that up and either take it to a market or take it to a cold storage facility. So thinking through where that product chain is going to go, because we're used to taking things, say, to a sale barn, and so there's a lot of steps in between there that you get out of, I guess, when you do a traditional route. Another thing is packaging. So you're going to have to make a really sharp looking, nice package. And so that might take some equipment in the beginning to invest in. Um, who could do that for you, or how could you do that yourself? Because that will take some time and energy to develop. So one place that people often go to sell is at a restaurant. And the example here is the Cove, which is in San Antonio, a really neat place that sells local products, so it has to be grown really nearby. They do as organic as possible, they do as pastured as possible, and they draw a really big crowd every week. When you go to a restaurant, they often just pay you a wholesale price, and keep in mind, a restaurant is probably going to want very specific cuts, and so that's where knowing how you're going to get rid of the rest of the animal comes in very handy, because you don't want to be stuck with, say, a ton of hamburger because you found a good outlet for your steaks. Oftentimes restaurants are going to want fresh product because they like for their um, diners to enjoy what they are eating. And so, more than likely, if you have a frozen product, which is much easier to keep on hand and make sure you have enough in stock all year long, that may not be as desirable to them. And also, if you're selling all of your product to a restaurant, you're really dependent on their business. And so, if something happens and they change their menu, or they decide to go with something else, or they're just not getting as many people coming in during a certain season, you may be left with a lot of product and very little profit. And so diversifying is probably one of the more important things to do if you're going to sell to a restaurant. Another place you could go is stores. So stores, they are very concerned about their bottom line. So I read a really great book I would encourage you to check out called Direct Marketing Beef. And this book outlined how, when they go to a grocery store, those people have their calculators out and they're talking about, hundreds of pennies. So they know what price they need to sell these products for and what they're hoping to gain out of it. But the benefit would be that you have less customers to deal with because you're going to sell the bulk of your product to the store. HEB, I put their logo on there because they're a really good example about how they're trying to buy more local products and highlight the farmers and ranchers in our area. And I, for one, appreciate that. And so I will go there and buy their products that I know that were grown locally. So a lot of restaurants are starting to jump on board with the local movement. So that might be something that would work out well for you. Farmers market. So farmers market's one that we definitely think about. I don't know about your area because I'm not sure where you're all from, but man, farmers markets have become really popular in South Texas. They used to be sort of just in the cities, so you would find them in San Antonio, but Corpus now has two or three. Even Alice, Texas has a farmers market now, the Jim Wells County Farmers Market, and they're popping up all over the valley. So hopefully there's some that you've noticed near you. Each farmer's market sets their own rules, so to speak. So you're going to have to find out what the rules are for that market. I know in San Antonio, the Pearl Brewery, which is a really big farmer's market, requires that you raise the product within 150 miles of San Antonio so that it is sort of a locally grown product. You can't sell something that you don't make within that area. You do get an instant payment, and in talking with people who go to farmers markets, that's what they like about it. Not only the contact with the customer, so they get feedback about their products, but also that they're taking money home that day, and so they're able to turn around that product pretty quickly. But consider how far you are from the nearest market, because in addition to any fees you may have to pay for your booth, you need to consider the fact that you'll be driving back and forth maybe each Saturday to stay at the farmers market. My concern when I was talking to these farmers and ranchers about selling at markets is, hey, that takes up every weekend because it's a commitment to be there. And if you're not there regularly, the farmers market themselves may not like that, or your customer base may be scattered because they can't rely on you to be there each week. And so committing to going every single week can be a big chore, but most of the people who sell there really enjoy going to the farmers market. It's their chance to socialize, see other people raising good products, and to talk to their consumers. So it's really eye-opening to find out how much the farmers market community in general meant to them. Mail orders. So this is what y'all said would probably be the most tough situation. And the book that I read about it really sort of agrees because shipping frozen food is very expensive, can be really difficult, especially in Texas. But if you have a product that's more stable, like jerky, that might be something that you want to look into. But again, you got to get rid of the whole animal, and so you might have to do a couple of different marketing options. And so if mail order works into that, all the better, especially with websites and people being able to purchase through the internet now. Direct mail or catalogs, these used to be really popular. We all can probably think of some even beef catalogs that people still regularly order from and give as gifts. It's pretty cheap labor, but you'd have to find a mail out list and then do some internet advertising um, or ship out a physical catalog. And I'm not really sure starting out what the return on designing a nice catalog and having that printed and then sending that to people would actually be. So direct mail and catalog maybe isn't done quite as much, but after you establish a customer base, it would be possible to sell off of your website direct ordering. So that's something to think about, or at least keep in the back of your mind. So community supported agriculture is something that we briefly touched on earlier. They call them CSAs. The benefit of CSAs, especially for people who have just started up, is that they pay for a share of your product up front. And so they receive weekly products throughout the harvest season or whatever season you designate for your product in exchange for money put up front. So you can use that to invest in your production. The downfall is that you have to make sure you have a diversity of products and that you're keeping on that, that you keep your people happy if you're hoping that they come back year after year because, um, some weeks they're taking a risk too because if some of your production fails, then they don't get their product. And they understand that. A lot of people who join CSAs are completely supportive of local farmers, and so they agree to that. But you wouldn't want to keep that up as a regular thing. And so CSAs could be a good thing for you starting out and helping to build a consumer base. And then you might want to branch out and diversify a little bit more. But CSAs are also easier to do if you live near a larger city or someplace where people are of mind to join such a thing because you will need to get a decent number of people invested in order to start your production. So here are my take-home tips, kind of to boil all this down. One is diversify your operation. So I think in general, sustainable agriculture or alternative ranching options, the whole purpose of this is to try to lower your risk and increase your profit. So diversifying, of course, will help you not to put all your eggs in one basket and hopefully help you to bring in a profit in different and fun ways. I would encourage you to visit other farms. So look up people who do things that are similar to what you're hoping to do. One place to find these people in addition to the internet may be to visit farmers markets and talk to people and find out who might be willing to sort of mentor you. Even if the farmers that you're getting mentored by live a good distance away, they could still be a valuable resource because they've made mistakes and they have experience with things and they could kind of help lead you in the right direction. Number three, mistakes are inevitable. So that sounds negative, but as we know, in ranching, it's kind of a trial and error many times. And so you want to make sure that those mistakes don't cost you a whole lot of money. So if you can, start out small, kind of play with different items and see what works well for your lifestyle and for your ranch. And see if you can get things to start going well for you before you invest in a large number of them. So definitely try to start out small and avoid losing a lot of money during those mistakes. Number four is go with proven results. When you talk a lot of people in niche markets or specialty markets, they're talking about trying a lot of innovative ideas, and I think that's very exciting. But they would all tell you to first research and really start out with what is a proven result and then go from there. So once you kind of get that down, you can start to adapt that to make your production better for your situation. But in the beginning, definitely do your homework and take the safe road until you start seeing a good profit return that you can play with. Number five is have patience. So for 3 to 5 years, people have told me that that's how long it takes for them to actually see a good profit coming back. So plan for that when you start to put together your business and production plan. Make sure that you've allotted for that amount of time for you to really get going. A lot of times the profit that you make in the beginning, you'll have to reinvest in your operation. And so sort of try to situate yourself to where that you can stick it out for a good 5 years to make a good go of it before you call it a success or a failure. So there's a number of online resources that I want to direct you to for more specifics about each type of operation. And they'll also have some good information about marketing on there. SARE, they're the ones that sponsored that training that we put on. That organization has so many publications through projects that they've sponsored. They have some really great books. That's where I believe I learned about the Direct Market Your Beef book. This website will have it all, but you'll have to search through and kind of search by topic. So if you're interested in, say, pastured lambs, then search by that, and there will be some information there for you. Another great one for listing your items and also finding people who do those items is localharvest.org. That is a really neat website for selling and buying. Go on there and kind of play with that. You can look through different CSAs, farmers markets, farms, and different events that are going on in your area. And that'll kind of help you figure out who's selling what in your general area. And it may help you to decide what you could contribute to, say, a CSA. Maybe you have a different product that you could offer that you just don't see nearby. The National Center for Appropriate Technology, or ATRA, has a lot of information on there. They support farmers and ranchers who are interested in doing sustainable and organic practices. And so definitely check them out. USDA, of course, is the one that governs a lot of these programs that are voluntary. Go on there and see what their guidelines are, and that will really help you see what you might be able to fit into or at least strive for, because even though you're not maybe certified organic, like if you went to the Texas Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association website, you could start doing practices that are close to organic and market it as such. So tell people, I'm a local product and I do things this way. And a lot of consumers are okay with that. They don't need it to exactly be organic. They understand there's certain things that you need to do in order to take care of your property and the environment that maybe just doesn't qualify you quite yet. So that's all I have, and I'll take questions. Maybe I'll leave it on this website in case any of you are copying down those web addresses. But if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I talked really fast, and it turns out I got done in plenty of time, so maybe I didn't have to.
Thank you, Dr. Clayton. As we sit here and wait for the folks to type out questions, one comment I like to make is that with this new Adobe Connect, you can actually listen to us with your iPhone or your Android or your iPad. So you can use your handheld device. So if by some chance we have a webinar, you're going to be in the back 40 somewhere, you can tune in with us or your phone and listen to us. I'll come back to this here in a little bit. As we sit here and I see questions coming in. Here in a little bit, you're going to get a satisfaction survey pop up on your screen. Go ahead and answer the survey. Help take time to complete the survey. The responses are anonymous, and the information will help us with the future webinars. And if by some chance, when it pops up, if it covers up your screen, if you look down your taskbar, you see like a little green icon with three little gentlemen around it. If you click on that, Adobe Connect will come back to the forefront. Again, our next session is going to be and I didn't write the date down, actually is Get Ready Treatment Mesquite. It's going to be on May the 2nd, and the speaker is going to be Dr. Bob Lyons, and you can also follow us on Facebook under facebook.com/txrange. So I'm going to go back to the other thing, but right now I'm going to go ahead and just pop the the survey up there. Again, if by some chance it covered up your screen, just click on the little icon at the bottom. It'll come back. You'll get back to Adobe Connect.
Yeah, thank you for participating today. And if you have questions, I'll stick around. And if not, I appreciate you tuning in, and be sure to come next time. That's going to be a really great webinar for those of you who are going to be treating mesquite.
You do have one question.
Okay, Cindy said, if interested in goat milk and cheese, can it be produced similar to cow whole milk and cheese? Are you talking about the actual process to make the cheese, or you mean is it governed sort of the same? Govern. Yeah, okay. Good because I don't know anything about making goat milk cheese, but definitely it's the same sort of deal, and so you would need to still get your license to be selling that product, but um, a lot of people have successfully broken into the goat market, and there's some really great natural products that people are also getting as a byproduct, like the soaps made out of goat milk, things like that. So um, don't even limit yourself just to goat milk or the cheese. There's a number of things that people would pay good money for because they're a good natural product. But yeah, that'll be sort of under the same thing as if you were to produce, cow milk cheese. People will also be interested in what you feed your goats. You'll be surprised. I ask a lot of detailed questions. So think about what you're producing and how you can market that uniquely. So, what about your product makes it unique? And that always brings, a higher price. And so it's worth thinking through how you would market such a thing. And definitely, I've seen a lot about goats on those different websites that are up here. So be sure to check that out if you're interested specifically in goat milk. I know my aunt is interested in the same thing.
Thank you all for attending today. I'm gonna go ahead and mute my mic. I appreciate you all being here today, and looking forward to seeing you all in May. So we'll hang around for a while, and Dr. Clayton will answer more questions. Y'all any more questions?
Okay. Yep. Thanks for attending. Everybody stay warm.